I think it takes a second to start. Okay.
Cool. I want to thank everyone for attending this workshop. I hope you also attend the other workshops here at this digital convention. As I said yesterday, I kind of wish we were all gathering together as Greens, kind of share these ideas and trying to talk about how we can advance our 4 pillars and 10 key values as a party, as well as ways we can grow our state parties, chapters, caucuses, what have you. But here we are, and I think we can still do that in this digital space. And I encourage everyone to talk to everyone about this, and talk to the delegates for tomorrow as we are preparing to see who our nominee is going to be for that. So my intention of this workshop, when I first proposed this, when we were calling for workshop proposals, I felt there was a need to kind of address issues because the A&M's annual national meetings and presidential nominating conventions I've been to in the past, we never had workshops like this before. So I kind of felt like trying to kick it off by doing something like this. And so that way, we can somewhat be on the same page and have dialogue with others in the queer community also about topics like this. And so just to give you like a little background, if that screen works, here we go. This is a little bit about myself. I am a gender non-conforming person. I use they, them pronouns. I am also queer. I have been an activist, community organizer, and political strategist for 20 years. I do have an academic background in the social sciences and in education, where I have been a panelist, a speaker, lecturer, and facilitator, both in the United States and internationally as well. I've been in the Lavender Caucus, but I've been in the Green Party since 2007, and I've held various positions and been involved in the Green Party in various capacities. And I am a social service professional where I work with LGBT youth. And I also have a nonprofit that does community organizing called People Organizing to Win and Engage for Reform, but really for revolution, also known as Power. And that's primarily based in the Midwest. So as we conduct ourselves in this workshop, let's just try to have fun. A lot of us have been to a lot of our business meetings and we get serious about, party matters and everything. I mean, let's try to have some fun, let's just talk to each other and this, this is a time to really engage with one another. So let's just try to make this as fun as possible. And in that same vein, this is a safe space. We're all here to learn from one another, but we're also trying to make it safe for those that also may feel uncomfortable also. Please keep your mic muted during the duration of this unless you're called upon. Myself and Ann is willing to help with the stack as well. I'm not going to look at the chat room, but if I see your hand raised, I will recognize you. And if you have a question, and if you do have a question, please try to make it pertain to this workshop, please. And please step up and step back. Respect others who want to speak. This is something that we all do. We should be doing wherever we're at and everything. So let's try and follow these guidelines and everything, because we again, try and get this done, and then we can move on to greater conversation and everything. And here's the other thing too. So this is a workshop and also not a forum. And when I say not a forum, this is not a time to we're not here to debate issues. We're having dialogue for sure, but let's try to keep it in the vein of this workshop and everything. So when we have these conversations, let's try to really engage in that. So in this workshop, it's kind of divided into 2 parts. an LGBT plus 101. I'm also going to say queer as more of an umbrella term than anything else. So we're going to go over that. Not saying all of you don't know this, because some of you I've seen come in. We're all part of the community in some fashion, so we all know this. But for those who may not know, we're going to try to go over these like terminology and other sorts. And we're also going to talk about the intersectionality of queer issues, because, you know, like any issue, none issue is in a silo, you know, and because of that, you know, there's many intersections that our community has to face, and we're going to go over those in a moment. So the one thing that we have to do is kind of have this break as to what sexuality and gender is. You know, for up to a certain point, there's always been a perspective as to what sexuality and gender is. That perspective has been from a heteronormative perspective. It has come from a capitalist perspective. And it wasn't until like recently, and by say recently, I'm going to say around the 60s. Other issues have been around prior to the 60s for sure, but from the 60s, a really engagement of queer liberation and talking about issues that need to be addressed and everything. And from that moment forward, there has been a big push to talk about issues in academia, issues in the workforce, issues in just in our society alone, in the schoolhouse, every which way. And so as we're kind of talking about these issues, we really have to deconstruct for certain institutions and certain parts of our society to break down what sexuality as well as gender is. So this is from a 2007 Gallup poll result that 4.5% of residents in the United States have identified as part of the LGBT community at some point. Now, that is, in my view, a little bit more of a conservative number. I think there's a much higher number. And with like the current census that's out now, doesn't really give room to give a full picture as to who is part of our community. And because they've written questions in a way that it's kind of hard to identify people. And then there's others who don't want to be identified or feel like they don't want to take part in the census for other reasons. And it's for that, that we have like a statistic like this Gallup poll. Oops. Come on. There we go. Now, if you haven't seen this before, this is a measurement that was designed by Alfred Kinsey. If those of you may not know, Alfred Kinsey kind of pioneered what is now known as like clinical sexology. There's even the Kinsey Institute that's based at Indiana University. He was a professor there at Indiana University, and the institute resides there currently. I would encourage all of you to check out the Kinsey Institute. They have a lot of great information about sexuality and gender. They always have speakers that are willing to come out to talk about issues regarding sexuality and gender. And when Kinsey designed this, this was measured in a way to have a response of these survey questions that he and his staff would travel around the country to really determine, you know, where people are on this spectrum. And you can see, you know, like from 0 is more heterosexual to 6 is more what's deemed homosexual. And to give you like a better picture of this, so with like, if you look at this image, you can kind of see what Kinsey was talking about, that what is, you know, these bookends of hetero and homosexuality. And then in between, what he may have deemed as, you know, ambivalent sexuality, bisexuality. And this is something that even Kinsey himself was trying to understand more. And if you even watch like documentaries about Alfred Kinsey, there's even a movie with Liam Neeson in it called Kinsey. Even Kinsey himself was kind of struggling this question as to if he was really heterosexual or homosexual, or is he bisexual? So this was like one of the starting points of that. This is not the definitive measurement of sexuality, but this is something that sparked the question of sexuality and what this all means. Now, when we talk about like attractions, all of us have 4 primary attractions: romantic, sexual, sensual, aesthetic. And as you can see, you know, all of us maybe have all 4 of these. It may be just one of these, maybe 2, but at some point, all of us are attracted to a person in one of these fashions. And this is something that we don't necessarily like talk about a lot. And when I do this kind of workshop for like educators, because in Illinois, they just passed a bill, House Bill 246, that is now required to have middle school and high school to talk about LGBT history. And so in the last few months, I've been going around to different school districts in my area and talking about topics like this. And when I present this, like, oh, we had no idea. You're right, because we don't talk about this in sex education. Although what's that? We don't have sex education. Oh, I think we need to bring that back. So this is something, when we talk about sexuality, you know, there's even a little bit of this rainbow going on as well. And when we talk about gender, you know, let's talk about like genderbread people, you know. So this is coming from an organization called Purple Sage. And so with this, there's like 4 aspects to gender. You know, I mean, there's like biological stats that we can, from a gonadal perspective, I mean, there's that. But as we know through studies, that it's just much more from a gonadal perspective. You know, there's a psychological as well as neurological information that we have to take in as well, which goes into like the personality, how we express outwardly, you know. So as you see me now, I present myself more masculine, you know, with the sport coat and the shirt, but, you know, there's much more to me than what is presented before you, you know. I have, you know, feminine qualities, you know, and all that stuff, you know, especially feelings and attractions. So when we talk about gender, you know, we really have to try to have this mold here and really talk about gender when we divulge into, you know, transgender, non-binary. So, you know, if we had our own PBS show and kind of take it off like Sesame Street, you know, how can you tell someone how to get to Q Street, which is Queer Street? So like, who's all in our area of Sesame Street? So we do, so this is a moment that I know, excuse me, if anyone in here would like to like speak up on some of these issues, what I'm about to be talking about here, please do, because again, I am a segment of the community. I'm not the community. So if there's some people in here I know who I may point to say, hey, can you divulge more information about this? So lesbian, for those we may know, you know, lesbian is someone who's like someone attracted to someone else who is a woman. And, you know, the symbol to the left, as you can see, is what, you know, females attracting to females. And then the image on the right are just 2 flags of representing other parts of, you know, the lesbian community. And I point out when I talk about this through my communication efforts, breaking down symbols like the top flag, which is usually displayed for those who are deemed like more butch and dyke lesbians. And I particularly show focus of the black triangle, the inverted black triangle, because a lot of people don't know that the black inverted triangle is something that was used during concentration camps. And when the Nazis put this on lesbians, they would make that triangle bigger. In fact, that was much bigger than the inverted pink triangle that was also used in concentration camps for anyone who's deemed, gay, homosexual. And so it's symbols like this that some of us, have taken back and display. I'm like, this is what this image that was portrayed before us, and now we are reclaiming this. So gay, a male who is, attracted to another male. This is the original pride flag, and you'll note that was the original pride flag because it has the pink stripe on top. The pride flags that we see and love today just have the red stripe on down. And now there's even other flags that incorporate black and brown communities that came out of Philadelphia. And there's another one that has the black and brown stripes, as well as the trans flag that's more of like a sided triangle there. And a lot of people are using that also as part of like their pride flag. So bisexual and pansexual. These two are more kind of pushed back a little bit in our community. A lot of people like to talk about like lesbians and gays, but sometimes we don't talk about the B in LGBT a lot, nor do we talk about like the P with pansexual. So if you're bisexual, you're someone who's attracted to like both male and female, and pansexual, like myself, there's a mantra that we have. It's, it's about hearts, not parts. So for those of us who are attracted, it's attracted about, like the person and not just who they physically identify as. And then with the colors, you can see with the bisexual, you can see like, with the pink and the blue being male, female, and with the pansexual has like the different colors of both male, female, non-binary as well. So asexuality, and I have to omit something here. This is an area that I am still learning in our community. I just learned about the asexual community 6 years ago. No joke. And I learned about it by way of a friend of a friend. And they, told me that they were asexual. And I was kind of taken aback. I'm like, well, what do you mean you're asexual? I don't know what that means. And they explained it to me. So generally someone who's like asexual usually is defined as having a lack of sexual attraction. Someone, they can have romantic attraction to another person. And there's something like called biromantic. Someone who's only attracted to male and females. There's aromantic, who is not sexually or romantically attracted to anybody. And asexuality, is an orientation among our community, and it's different from celibacy. And that's one of the main points here. Celibacy is a decision. Someone can decide to be celibate. Asexuality is not, from what I've learned. And even some of the youth I work with who are asexual, and I work with 5 of them, we have these ongoing conversations. And in each week, I learn about how this is more of an orientation than anything else. This is not a mental disorder at all. there is no chemical or any imbalance. Anyone who's deemed asexual, and those who are asexual are not afraid of intimacy as well. In fact, the 5 youth I just mentioned, 2 of them are in relationships. They're more romantic relationships than sexual ones, but they are in relationships, and they do participate in certain sexual activity at their own level. But the sad part of the asexual community, or also ace community, they have been pushed out in our community a lot, and unfortunately they have been assaulted by those in our community and outside of our community, just to make sure, are you sure you're not really attracted to somebody, so there is that. I just want to check here really quick. Cynthia, are you with us?
Yeah, hi, it spontaneously muted me, sorry.
That's okay. So Cynthia, I know you identify as asexual. So is some of the information I laid out there correct, or is there something that I'm missing?
I think you've done an excellent job on this. I will also say that it's also a spectrum. The asexual spectrum, or aspec, includes people who are totally asexual and or totally aromantic, to people who are a bunch of other things that fall under this, including, let's see, demisexual, lithosexual. These also fall under romantic as well. There's a couple other ones. Lithosexual, as Leslie Feinberg had the book Stone Butch Blues. Litho comes from stone. Those are the quickest way I'll say it is people who believe it's better to give than to receive, applies to their sexual and or romantic interactions, as well as their gift giving. Demisexual is that, or demi-romantic is that you're only capable of being romantic or sexual with someone you're already emotionally connected with, which is not there are people who would prefer to be with people that they are emotionally connected with, but this is the same way that asexual is not just, you don't choose asexuality the way you choose celibacy. You don't choose demisexuality any more than asexuality. It's not that you just decide, oh, I'm picky and I'm only going to be with the right people. You feel nothing pretty much towards somebody who is icky emotionally. Somebody that doesn't work for you or that isn't treating you right, you are not going to feel it. So that's demi. I've heard of several others. I've actually heard of asexuality as a spectrum and a continuum between people who are completely sexual to people who are completely asexual. And the fun part is that the opposite word I've seen is allosexual, but it's spelled like allosexual, which makes me think of Jurassic Park. Go figure.
Cool.
So yeah, it's an entire spectrum of orientations. It's a family of orientations. And for years, people thought it was only the people who are 100% asexual, and everything that you're saying is accurate. It's just that there's so much people are coming up with new words and terms all the time. I recommend people go to, I think it's AVEN, either .com or .org, Asexuality, Visibility, and Education Network, because this is the thing, sexual orientation and attraction is a combination of all the things you said, plus what attractions and feelings do you have, if you have them, to what degree, what circumstances are there for you to be up for that. And there's also gray sexuality, which is some people sometimes feel attracted sexually or romantically to people, and sometimes they don't, because it's a gray area. It's called gray sexual.
For sure. Thank you.
There's probably a lot that I'm leaving out because, as I said, there's new words being come up with every 5 minutes. One of my best friends ran some of the gender labels past me about a week ago. I'm like, yikes, I never heard of these, but they all sound wonderful.
That's right. Well, thank you, Cynthia, for that. And I'm glad you just mentioned all that, because in this slide right here, what you just said is exactly what you just said. And I couldn't even said it any better than what you just said. And the one thing I will note, so like the one youth I do work with, who has come out as asexual now, and I've been working with them for the last 3 years, came to me and said, AJ, I am now demisexual. And so we had this big conversation about like, what was that like? I mean, I want to know more about this, because I mean, this is new territory for some of us in the community and in greater society, you know? So I think another website, asexuality.org is another one. Asexual visibility that Cynthia just talked about, please check those out. And I also
one other,
recommend
demisexuality.org. Sorry to jump on you, but I just remembered. Duh, I should have said that one.
there's that. And I also recommend checking out, most colleges these days have women's studies department, sexuality and gender studies department. So I would check those out. University of Wisconsin, in Madison has one, University of Illinois Springfield, Northern Illinois University, University of Illinois Chicago. These are the ones like I know. University of Wisconsin Milwaukee. Those are my go-to places for new information. And talk to your neighborhood-friendly asexual that you know as well, because they know they're part of the community. Any questions up to this point when it comes to sexuality? Any questions at all? Seeing none, hearing none. So when we talk about the sexuality part, now we're talking about the gender side of things. As I mentioned, we're going back to our genderbread person. So when we talk about transgender, it's more of a umbrella term. And underneath that umbrella term, there's like more binary trans man, trans woman, non-binary, where we get to gender queer, gender fluid, agender, gender non-conforming, and there's a whole bunch of those. Anyone who wants this presentation, I'll be more than happy to send this to you, because on here I have various little videos that you can just scroll on top of these words, like the watch me now take you to a video that dwells more of like the science of transgender, of when we talk about, it's not just the gonadal perspective, but it's also the psychological perspective and neurological perspective as well. So that's a 4-minute video on that. We're talking about intersex. Intersex is more common than we realize. 1.7% babies who are born are intersex. That's as common as someone having red hair. So, and there's even more studies out there that it's not just common, but it might be one of the leading things for babies that have been born. The image you see before you is what's called like the phallometer, and this is something that OBGYNs and other physicians have used in one capacity or another. It may look exactly like this, but something like this. When babies are being born, and if they see something that is not quite a clitoris or something that's not quite a phallus, then this ambiguity part is where they do unacceptable surgery. One of these healthcare facilities that I know in Chicago is Lurie's Children's Hospital. Lurie's Hospital has always been trying to be like the leading medical institution when it comes to like LGBT healthcare. Unfortunately, they are also one of the leading institutions that does corrective surgery when children are born.
I wouldn't call that corrective.
Well, exactly. They'll call it corrective, but again, it's unacceptable surgery. And so because of this, every time we try to present this to Lurie's Hospital, they just kind of deny those claims. So this is something here. So when we talk about intersex, and again, I know there's other folks on here who can speak to it more than I can. But intersex is someone who's been born not only just what is presented gonadally, but they have some other organs as well. So Jamie Lee Curtis is one of the more visible intersex people who has, you know, underdeveloped testes still. Another example is there's a documentary called Intersexed. I recommend anyone checking out that documentary. And in one of those segments, there's a narrative from a person who was born female. The OBGYN and a surgeon, you know, made that person more male, presenting male. And then it wasn't until like years later that they found out that they were female, and so they had to go back and change medical procedures with that person and everything. I know Cynthia's on here, but is there someone else who would like to speak on this topic? Hearing none, seeing none. Two spirits. Something else that doesn't get talked about a lot. So two spirits. Two spirit is known in different other indigenous languages. So in Navajo culture, it is the belief that's in harmony of the interrelationship between feminine and masculine. If you know, Ojibwa will have like a different belief of that. Same way with, like I said, any other indigenous community. And it doesn't get talked about much because when, you know, imperialism happened, you know, and this manifest destiny happened, you know, we had Christian missionaries coming into areas that's in current day Arizona, California, elsewhere. And they have forced indigenous communities to assimilate into more of a heteronormative culture. And as such, they have suppressed a lot of indigenous folks to not even talk about these things. And in fact, you know, Two Spirit is also part of ceremony as well. And a lot of those who are Two Spirit held elder positions in their tribes, if not nation. And so like those who I've talked to with out in Arizona, on reservations out there, this is really part of that. They really mention about how, you know, those who are Two Spirit do more of the ceremonial work, and they praise those who are Two Spirit as well. And so this is like their flag. There's different other representations of the flag, but this is one representation. Are there any questions on this first half of this? Any questions at all?
Not question. Oh, actually, I do have one question. Did you have a picture of any of the intersex flags? I've seen at least 2 or 3.
No. And that's the one thing I did forget. So there's the intersex flag, which is yellow with a purple circle in the middle is one iteration of the flag. That's the more predominant flag I know of. So there is that.
And just 2 quick things on intersex. I thought you handled excellently. I will also say that intersex, from what I understand as an intersex person and activist, is that it actually refers to anybody whose biology, all their reproductive biological stuff falls anywhere between what's expected of male and expected of female, not just genitals, internal or external, chromosomes, hormones, any of the sex characteristics. And were you about to mention chimeras? Because some chimera people are intersex.
No, I was not, but please do. Because again, so when we talk about trans non-binary issues, there's like, again, if we go back to an earlier slide, there's, if you look at the trans rainbow, the umbrella, it's an umbrella term, but we go talk about non-binary. There's much more to in that community, and chimera is one of them. And Cynthia, those who are saying who chimera, what does that mean?
Okay, the word comes from Greek myth. It was a mutant super creature born from the union of various animals and mythological creatures. The same way that the old word hermaphrodite from Greek mythology is from the child of a god and goddess who is in between. basically a chimera is when twins, triplets, or other multiple fetuses for various reasons wind up having to merge in utero. And instead of mommy being sent home with 2, 3, or 4, or 5, or whatever number of kids, you're sent home with one kid whose body is a composite of all the fetuses that managed to merge. And I do have a statistic on that. It's lumped under vanishing twin syndrome, where one or more siblings will vanish while the pregnancy is going on. That statistic is something like 1 out of every 8 people, and that does include miscarriages and reabsorptions into the mother, but also covers chimeras. Not all chimera people are intersex, but some are both, because if the fetuses are all identical or of the same sex, then they're of the same sex. But if the siblings are of differing sexes, like in my case, you have somebody who was born with some stuff of both, and that's how you get an intersex chimera. And just like with intersex, chimera people can be of any gender identity or sexual orientation.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can I ask it now or?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm part of an organization called Get the L Out. Obviously, in the beginning of the gay liberation movement, it was, you know, gay and lesbian liberation, then the B was put in there, and then the T came along. And now there's the Q, and there's the plus, and there's all these other identities that you're talking about today. But L is in the LGBTQ, and yet there is a strong movement to get the L out. And that's because there's tension between the males who identify as transgender and the lesbians, because males who identify as transgender sometimes identify as lesbians as well, and their penises are still
transgender women are women.
Excuse me, I'm not done with
Yes,
my
trans
question.
women are women.
No, I'm sorry, but transgender women are women. I'm not going to permit you to like bash trans women and call them men. I'm sorry, but I'm going to interrupt you. If you call trans women men, I'm going to interrupt you.
Thank you. I am also a transgender woman as well as intersex. As I said, intersex is sex, transgender is gender. Some people are both, and the word for an intersex person who's identified on the trans spectrum or umbrella is intergender.
Any other questions? So let's talk about the crossroads, the intersections of the LGBT community. Because as I said earlier, our community is not in a silo, just like how race is not in a silo, just how like environmental justice is not in a silo. There's a lot of intersections that go with that. And there's a lot of topics that we can address, but here are some of the ones that I speak to when I do my own activism and organizing. So when we have these issues that are being brought up, these are the areas that do come up. You know, there is social institutions, government, religion. There is the division between ally and accomplice. And again, if you would like to have this presentation, if you scroll over ally and accomplice, there is a nice little write-up from the Indigenous Action Network that talks about abolishing the ally industrial complex and moving towards more of having more accomplices. There is patriarchy that, you know, talks about suppresses and oppresses the queer community. Pink capitalism, which I'll address in a minute, but when I talk about pink capitalism or rainbow capitalism, it's the idea that, you know, capitalism is profiting off our community. But I want to talk about this a little bit more about ally versus accomplice. Sometimes in even our own community, talking about allies can be a very slippery slope. On one hand, we need allies who are in solidarity with us. And that's a key word. Allies who are in solidarity with us versus allies who are apart, who wants to be with us, speak up along with us. But some of these things that on the slide do happen, and I've seen this happen also. I've seen organizations do co-optation of other queer organizations. There's like even gatekeepers who withhold information in order to advance certain issues. Some allies just do it as like missionary work, like, oh, I'm just going to help you out, but they leave. They're not in our community, so like they leave. It's almost the same way as, you know, like when Katrina happened in New Orleans, a lot of people went to the lower Ninth Ward, done cleanup work, and it's like, well, that's good. Well, we're sorry for what happened, but we got to go. We did our work. They're not in the thick of things. They're not part of that community. They don't understand how homes were blockaded by police, so they won't access that. Same way within our community, you know, people just come in and then they leave, and sometimes they'll just stand a block or two away. So like, we're with you, we're, you know, yay, go, marriage equality, and that's it. And some people do things out of act of resignation because they think that's a sense of duty. But there is also this thought that, you know, instead of doing that sense of duty to resign, weaponize your privilege. You know, if you are working with us in solidarity, you know, trying to weaponize that, you know, try to make change from within, or try to find ways to use that privilege to advance a cause, whatever that may look like. And then we have conversations of what that look like. So with some of the things that are going on, so health and human services, one area. This is come from a report out of Minnesota, and out of this percentage, one respondent to this survey said, I don't want my doctor to know because I fear they will treat me differently when it comes to their own health. Some say they're out, others say they're not out, because there is in medicine, in healthcare, if someone says like they're out, if you disclose to them, hey, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm bi, I'm trans, intersex, whatever the case may be, there will be a different experience with that physician if you're not. And even like my own physician might explain, you know, what my orientation is. It's a different experience than I had with previous physicians when I was not out. So this Rainbow Initiative that 11,000, little over 11,000 people did this survey. And again, this was in Minnesota, doing this Rainbow Initiative to get a better picture of healthcare for the queer community. And as you can see, you know, like 30 respondents says they were smokers compared to the 16 general population that weren't. And, you know, studies like that kind of shows, you know, why those in the LGBT community, you know, like smoke more than those who don't. 32%, little over 32% of the trans respondents report of not having safe, convenient place to exercise in the for physical activity. 1 in every 6 LGBTQ respondents, 26%, reported being discriminated against by healthcare providers. So like, these are some of the response that came out of this report out of Minnesota. And this is a snapshot to the greater context of what's happening in the United States when it comes to healthcare. So the other side is human service, and as someone who works in social service, I hate to report that there's not a lot of great strides in the human service side of things. There have been improvements. Don't get me wrong. There have been improvements, but the problem in human social service is that there's not enough training education for new social workers or even counselors. A lot of MSW programs, Masters in Social Work programs, don't offer courses on working with LGBT populations. I can think of really 5 departments in the United States alone that has a course, social work in LGBT populations, and University of Wisconsin-Madison is one of them. And even though it's a 12-week course and they cover a lot of things on the clinical side and the what's called the macro social work side, the community side, it's still not enough. And if you get that one person like myself who works with the LGBT population, then their caseload doubles, if not triples. So if you work in social service and doing case management, think about this. Your caseload just doubled because you're the only person that only knows about this but is an experience of this. So that means the clients you work with will further, not get less access, but there's going to be more time spent on something else and less time engaging more with that community. If there was more education and training for social workers and counselors on our community, that caseload would be distributed. So we try to be as evenly as possible. I did see someone's hand raised. Who was that?
I don't see it now. Did someone?
Joni? Is it Joni?
I'll unmute her so she can speak. Let's see.
Joni, are you there?
Joni, can you talk? Or unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, yeah, I had raised my hand thinking, boy, I'm having a hard time following the information because of the issues going on in the chat and with the previous speaker. And then I put my hand down thinking, well, I'll just ignore the chat. I don't do a whole lot of these, so I'm kind of pulled. It feels like that there was an opportunity to speak since action was taken on issues in real time of what's going on. But I mean, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying I can either just ignore the chat so I can focus on the information, or if you all want to take this opportunity to just say what a safe space is and how disagreements and challenges are fine unless they're disallowing someone's very existence. Over.
Thank you, Joni. And I'm just going to pause here for a second to say this. As I said earlier in this workshop, I'm not looking at the chat, focusing on the presentation, and anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and that's what I'm going to acknowledge, because in the previous workshop I was just in, trying to do answering questions from a chat, and this was a little bit more of a double duty and taken away from the presentation. So if there is some disparaging remarks, I apologize that the safe space is being broken right now. Again, we're here to understand these issues. We're here to understand what we can do as a community for those of us who are in, the queer community, and those of us who want to work in solidarity in the community. We need to be doing that. And please, if there is some disparaging remarks that I am not seeing, please let and know about it and try to handle this and everything, because I'm trying to do so much as possible here. If this was more in person, this would be a little bit more of a different experience that we're having right now. So let me say again, apologize for anyone who's been hurt by any disparaging remarks. That is not the intention for this workshop. This workshop is to be educational and informative. And with that, I'm sorry. So I'm going to resume the my presentation here. We're almost done, and then hopefully we can have a further conversation about the topics.
AJ, can I mention one quick thing before you hop back? You were talking about the discrepancies with the statistics and how people don't necessarily feel safe or included in some medical spaces. That's why I feel you have such weird statistics on intersex, that you have really low ones and some higher ones. Because not all the doctors know what intersex is. Some doctors aren't okay with intersex people existing still, which is the kind of work that I'm so glad you're working on. And there's the lower statistics you mentioned. Meanwhile, an 18-year-old study by Robin Wood, who just surveyed people across this country who granted were of adult age and able to talk about their story, but her numbers are 7-10% of the population in terms of people who are out knowing that they are intersex as of 2002.
Yes, and even to your point about skewing information, this is the one thing where information does get skewed because, again, we don't ask the right questions. We don't even think about other communities at all, and therefore we get certain responses like you just saw here from the Rainbow Initiative in Minnesota. And the same is true for other organizations. But organizations like Gleason, which is the Gay Lesbian Student Education Network, Gleason, they talk specifically to youth in high schools and trying to get a pulse there and put out reports. Same way with Howard Brown in Chicago, that specifically talks to the LGBT community to talk about medical and human service needs. So these things do exist, but the greater context, Mayo Clinic, Lurie's Hospitals, others, I have to question sometimes their responses, because as someone who's also a researcher in social sciences, I have to question how'd you ask this question? Where's the bias when doing this kind of survey, or whatever the qualitative inquiry was about, or the quantitative data that you're trying to report on. So these are things that we're still struggling with, unfortunately. But again, there's a little bit of improvement along the way. Just like the American Psychological Association now just didn't, declassify homosexuality in 76, not a mental disorder. So 40 some years ago, it's not a disorder anymore. But even the APA said, we now can use gender neutral language when writing reports now, whereas before you had to write things like male or female, or just male or just female. Now you can put gender neutral language when writing reports in the social sciences. Another issue is immigration. And when we talk about like the border, not just the border in Mexico, but even those who are trying to seek asylum, political asylum, in places like Africa, in places in South America, in the middle Asia, near Asia, trying to come into the United States, is when we get to the immigration issue. Because again, organizations who are trying to work with refugees, so that places like Uganda, that if you come out in Africa, in Uganda, you will be put to death, if not put in prison for life. So there are people who are trying to flee that country in order to really seek their freedom and everything. But we have people like Trump in office. Even Obama had these strict immigration policies, and therefore we have to deal with these kind of issues in our community. Come on. There we go. So the prison industrial complex, this is another predominant issue in the community. This is the statistics about the juvenile justice system when it comes to LGBT youth. And as you can see, there's this is a whole topic by itself. You know, I can do another workshop just on the prison industrial complex and the LGBT issues and everything. So as you can see here, you know, facilities, juvenile facilities, you know, don't have like the adequate accessibility to things. There's a lot of inappropriate placement of juveniles who are in correctional facilities. There's inadequate health care, inadequate human service. There's little oversight in facilities. There's inappropriate supervision, challenges when it comes to family services, especially trans youth where officers and correctional officers, that is, will use, you know, like the legal name, as they say, instead of, you know, what the name they really do go by. And so it becomes hard for those, for the youth. And as you can see here, you know, 85% of those who are incarcerated in the juvenile system are youth of color. This is an incarceration rate. This was a breakdown of who's in the correctional facility system now. So we have black trans folk, 47% that are incarcerated. This one here, you know, condoms are not a crime. A lot of people don't know that there are condom laws or laws surrounding contraceptives. There is the perceived notion by officers that, you know, when they take a purse or a bag from someone and they literally dump it out to find marijuana, drugs, or whatever they think they're trying to find, and they see a condom, well, then their next line of logic is, oh, you have a condom and you look like someone who does prostitution, therefore you're soliciting prostitution, so therefore you're going to jail. This is what I have to tell my youth all the time at the drop-in center I work at, that you have to be careful on where you have your condoms, because if you do get pulled over by police, then they're going to ask questions. Because we have that lack of sex education in our society, and having being acceptable of having contraceptives in our possession, we have these laws. Now, I believe California removed their condom law, but other places, I believe New York still has them, Illinois does. Elsewhere, this is still criminal to even carry a condom. So as a professor once told me years ago, if you really want to know more about the issues, you got to follow the money. And so therefore, there is a cost to homophobia as well as transphobia. And I'm not even going to say homophobia is queerphobia as a more encompassing term. So the cost of queerphobia, as you can see on an international scale, as you can see, the amount of money here, so like Middle East and North Africa, $16 billion, that's the actual cost of laws that are oppressing the community there in the Middle East and in North Africa, in part of our community. Same with Asia, which cost them, I believe, 30, if I'm reading this right, excuse me, sorry, it's so blurry, 30 billion. about 49 billion in Western Europe and North Africa. So this is one cost. There's also what's called, the homophobic climate index, or as I'm calling it, the queer climate index. These are the countries, as you can see, that are more inclusive. The top 10 most queerphobic as well as transphobic countries, and then the ones who are lower and middle income countries that are inclusive as well. So as we see this kind of information, we can make certain correlations as to, oh, you have this law, therefore you are taking away a workforce. Oh, we can't do this, so therefore I have to find another job, and that means I may not have a job because you're now kind of putting us in a box as to what kind of job we can do. So again, this information doesn't capture every dimension of queerphobia. And this, as you see, this slide comes from the United Nations at one of their conferences in 2016. So this is the most current information that we have available. Any questions at this moment?
On the climate index you're talking about,
yeah.
Definitely they cover transphobia, biphobia, and homophobia. What about interphobia, the same oppressions done against intersex people, or acephobia, which is the same kind of oppressions done against people on the asexual spectrum?
So we don't have that information because, again, as I said, the way we ask questions and try and incorporate all the community, we don't have that information. And if one would, and I believe one researcher will say, well, we recognize intersex, but we're folding them in as trans, as one encompassing term, instead of breaking it down by those individual communities. So
wow.
So, but if anyone who can look at this information, again, we can still try to make correlations about intersex issues and what's going on in countries that are queer and transphobic. We can break down on where this information is at. It's going to be very conservative numbers, but yeah, we don't have information because, again, ACE community, that is still being a new thing when it comes to research, because again, we don't talk about the ACE community as much as we should.
Hey, Jay.
Yes, David.
Hey. Because the chat has been shut down and because of some things that have been said in the chat, I'm just going to ask you if you can affirm the understanding that I think we have in the Green Party, that we are able to discuss differences together in this party, even differences about sex and gender. That's just a question for you, AJ.
So repeat your question again, David.
Well, because a member of the group was dropped from this session, I'd like to hear an affirmation by you that it's possible for us to have discussions about these issues within the Green Party.
David, I just want to mention it was not AJ that removed the member, it was me. And I'm happy to talk to you about it later, and AJ can feel free to answer you right now. I just want to clarify that.
All right, thank you. I'd like to talk.
I don't know what was said in the chat other than it's been addressed that there's been disparaging remarks. And if it's the same person I think you're talking about in question, they even expressed those disparaging remarks on here. So if they were removed because of that, then that was the decision made because they made those disparaging remarks. Any other questions?
Are you going to cover also the unfortunate climate of discrimination, violence, and murder that has necessitated events such as Transgender Day of Remembrance, Intersex Day of Remembrance and Solidarity, the higher levels of suicidality in the community that has necessitated Miley Cyrus forming the Happy Hippie House and another group forming the Trans Lifeline?
Yeah. I was not going to address that because I don't want to address that. But I can address more of the suicide question and the violence regarding that. There's a lot of information when it comes to mental health in the queer community and the trans community. There are we have huge numbers. I can tell you about 60% nationally, and you can check out Gleason, as I just mentioned earlier. You can also check out like Illinois Safe School Alliances. You can check out related organizations like that have these numbers as well. But overall, there's like a large amount of those of us in the community who complete suicide and for mental health reasons. And this violence, this act that it does happen is because of being bullied, because of discrimination, because of being told what someone is and what there is not, or what their orientation is or what their orientation is not. So, and because of this, there are those who do complete suicide. And there are and even the youth I work with, we have those conversations. In fact, when we do an intake form, when we have new youth coming to our drop-in center, that's like one of the questions we ask, because we want to have a better understanding on what suicide looks like, and then how we can prevent suicide. And I'm not getting all the details, but like, I mean, I'm even getting emotional when I'm about to say. Some of the youth that I even talked to, we talk about like how they're going to do it and why they're doing it, because they heard it in the school for the umpteenth time, because they walked around town and said, we're going to kill you. And that's just happened in rural Illinois. There are people who are being murdered, trans women being murdered in places like New Orleans and Houston, Texas, and other parts of the South. Not even just in the South. There's even those who are being assaulted in New York and California and elsewhere. Someone got murdered who made a profound impact in my life in Laramie, Wyoming, named Matthew Shepard. Because two ranchers, didn't like who Matthew was and just drug him out in the backwoods of Laramie and left him by the fence post. And I hate to bring this up because some of us have these kind of experiences, so I apologize if I opened wounds. That was not my intention. But this is the things that we talk about in our community, and things that are more important to talk about in our party and in our chapters and everything else. Because this is a reality. This is a reality that's happening right now. And the more this is happening, the suicide rate is going to get higher and higher and higher. And then we're going to ask ourselves why this is even happening. How come it's not being addressed? Well, we're trying to address it right now, but who's even listening? I cut someone off. Who was that?
No, sorry, that was me. I was saying these are rights issues. This is the right to not be murdered, the right to not be raped, the right to not be assaulted, the right to not be imprisoned for being yourself. It's also intersectionality, because while every demographic of any kind is open to this kind of violence, unfortunately, the biggest demographics usually involve transgender women of color living in economically disadvantaged areas. And I could bring in a few other demographics, including people in the sex work area who fall into any of these demographics. So basically you have anti-sex worker bias merging with homo, bi, trans, other sexual gender phobia, hatreds, merging with racism, merging with classism in one shot. And we are an intersectional party devoted, among other things, to upholding rights of all diverse peoples and opposing all hateful isms. So I think that that's why we're talking about this, not just to make people go away crying, but to show this is the kind of stuff we are working to try to make better.
So I see you, Margaret. If you have a question, you're going to be the last question because we're a little over time right now. And Chris is right behind me. And I don't want to piss Chris off. Margaret, do you have a quick question?
No, it wasn't so much a question. I just wanted to make a quick statement right at the end here because I think it's really important to say, given the context of the George Floyd rebellion, which is going on right now. Black trans lives matter. And since last week, there have been 6 Black trans women who have been murdered. And I want to say their names right here because I think it's really important. Brayla Stone from Little Rock, Arkansas, Mercy Mack from Dallas, Texas, Shaki Peters from Amite City, Louisiana, Drayla McCarty from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Tatiana Hall from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Bree Black from Pompano Beach, Florida, all in the last week. There's an epidemic of violence against trans women of color, and we have to stand against it because no one else is. We have an obligation to do so. Thank you very much, AJ, for giving me a chance and for having this class.
Thank you, Margaret. That's it. Chris is next. Stay with us because Chris is going to talk about something awesome about eco-socialism, which we all need to understand and learn and everything. So thank you all for joining. Again, I apologize if any disparaging remarks were made in the safe space, but we're here to learn. And hopefully we can band together in solidarity to fight for queer liberation. With that, thank you for attending.